The chest of silver hit the frozen mud with a sound like a death knell, and Reuben Hudson's hand went to the knife at his belt before he even realized he had moved. "Careful, huntsman," murmured old Elder Myra beside him, though her eyes never left the gates. "That is not silver you want to be reaching for a blade over." Beyond the open gates of Thornwatch Hold, past the frost-crusted ruts of the trade road, the Orc war camp sprawled like a bruise across the valley, floor-hide tents and cookfires, and the black banners of the Ashfang horde snapping in a wind that smelled of tallow smoke and old blood. And walking toward the gate, flanked by two tusked warriors in wolf-pelt cloaks, came a woman who moved like she owned the ground beneath her boots. She was tall enough to meet Reuben's eye without tilting her chin, her skin a deep mossy green touched gold where the weak winter sun caught her jaw, and she wore fitted leathers the color of dried blood, laced tight from throat to hip, a fur mantle thrown back off broad shoulders to bare corded arms ringed with copper bands. A curved blade rode her hip, and she wore it the way other women wore a shawl, like it was simply part of her. The crowd along the palisade wall had gone dead silent, save for one voice. "That's the price of peace." Captain Boren Ashby spat into the mud, loud enough to carry. "We're buying a monster with good silver and calling it a bride." Rogash Gorehorn's eyes found him instantly, and something in her jaw tightened like a bowstring drawn to the ear. "Say that again," she said, and her voice was low and rough as gravel dragged over stone, "and I will show you exactly what kind of monster your silver bought." Boren's hand dropped to his sword hilt. Along the wall, 3 more guards leveled crossbows, and beyond the gate, the 2 Orc warriors flanking Rogash went rigid, hands finding axe hafts. And for one terrible heartbeat, Reuben understood that 6 weeks of siege and starvation and grief could end right here, in this frozen yard, over one man's ugly mouth. He stepped between them. He was not a large man, wiry where the Orcs were broad, plain where Boren was polished in the Lord's colors, but he had spent 20 years reading the deep woods for signs of danger before it arrived, and every instinct he owned screamed that this was the last moment before something broke that could not be mended. "Boren." He kept his voice level, unhurried, the same tone he used gentling a spooked horse. "Lord Alaric gave the order for this exchange himself. You want to be the man who undoes 6 weeks of siege talks in front of the whole horde. Put your hand away from that sword." "Who in the hells are you two?" "Reuben Hudson, Lord's huntsman." He didn't look away from Boren, though every part of him was aware of the Orc woman's gaze burning against the side of his face like a brand. "I answer to Alaric, not to you, and I am telling you to stand down before you get every soul on this wall killed." For a long moment nothing moved. Then Boren, sneering, lifted his hand from his hilt and turned it into a mocking little wave. "Fine. Let the huntsman play nursemaid to the Lord's new pet." He stalked off toward the barracks, and the crossbows along the wall lowered, and the 2 Orc warriors at Rogash's back eased their grips on their axes, though they did not fully release them. Rogash looked at Reuben for the first time as though truly seeing him, not the color of his eyes or the cut of his jaw, but weighing him, the way a smith weighs raw ore before deciding if it is worth the forge. "You stopped that for the treaty," she said. "Not for me." "I stopped it," Reuben said, "because a woman shouldn't be threatened for standing where she was told to stand, whatever color her skin is." He nodded toward the chests being hauled through the gate by 2 sweating porter's furs stacked high, dark and glossy, and beneath them the dull gleam of silver bars packed in straw. "That's the last of the bride price, I take it." "Furs from your lord's own hunting grounds," she said, and there was something bitter buried under the words, "and silver enough to buy a small kingdom. Also a man I have never spoken to may call me wife and end a war he started with his own greed." Her golden eyes flicked to Reuben's, sharp and assessing. "Does that trouble you, huntsman, that your lord bought a woman like a prize sow?" Reuben didn't flinch from it. "It troubles me plenty," he admitted. "But it's the only thing on this frozen earth keeping 6,000 of your kin from burning this town to the ground, and keeping every soul in it from starving out come spring. I don't have to like a thing to understand why it's happening." Something shifted in her face, not warmth, not yet, but a grudging recalculation, as if she had expected a different answer and gotten one that fit awkwardly into whatever box she'd built for men like him. "They tell me," she said quietly, "that I am to have a keeper. A man to see I do not run and do not die until the marriage rites are spoken." "That be me," Reuben said. "Lord Alaric's orders came down this morning." For a moment the corner of her mouth twitched, not quite a smile, something wilder and more dangerous than that. "Then I suppose, Reuben Hudson, we will be seeing a great deal of one another." Behind her, the porters staggered the last chest through the gate, and it landed in the mud with the same heavy, final sound as the first, silver enough to buy a bride. And none of it, Reuben would come to understand far sooner than he expected, worth a single hair on her head. The keep at Thornwatch Hold had not been built with comfort in mind. It was a squat, gray-stone thing, 3 centuries old, its walls scarred from older wars, its halls narrow enough that 2 men could not walk abreast without turning sideways at the corners. They gave Rogash a chamber in the northern tower, high enough to see the siege lines from her window, far enough from the Lord's own rooms that no one could claim impropriety before the vows were spoken. Reuben's task, as laid out by Lord Alaric himself in a clipped, distracted voice while signing 3 other documents at once, was simple. Watch her. Guard her from any fool in the town who might think killing an orc bride a fine way to restart a war for profit. Guard the town, too, from any notion she might slip a knife into someone's ribs in the night and vanish back to her own lines. See that she lived to stand at the altar in 3 weeks' time, when the Horde's elders would come under truce banner to witness the vows and with them the end of the siege. "She is the whole piece, Hudson," Alaric had said, not looking up from his papers. "Every barrel of grain we have left, every child in this town, rests on her reaching that altar alive and willing. I don't care how you manage it, manage it." So Reuben managed it the only way he knew, by being present, unglamorous and steady, the way he'd learned to be present in the deep woods where impatience got a man killed and patience got him fed. He brought her meals himself rather than trust a servant who might spit in them. He walked the tower stairs with her when she wanted air, close enough to intervene, far enough to give her the illusion of solitude she so clearly craved. On the 3rd night he found her standing at the narrow window of her chamber, staring down at the distant cookfires of her own people, and he did not speak, only leaned against the door frame and waited, because some silences were not his to fill. "You are still here," she said at last, without turning. "Someone has to be. You could have sent a guard. Boren would have liked the duty. He hates me enough to enjoy watching me suffer." "Boren's a fool with a big mouth and a small mind," Reuben said. "I wouldn't trust him to watch a dog, let alone a woman whose life is the only thing standing between this town and a burned husk." She turned then, and in the low lantern light her eyes seemed almost molten. "You speak of my life as a duty, a treaty term." "I speak of it," Reuben said carefully, "as a life, same as any other. Yours doesn't stop mattering just because men sign papers about it." Rogash studied him for a long moment, arms crossed over the fitted leather of her bodice, the fur mantle discarded across the bed behind her. "You are a strange man, Reuben Hudson, never claimed otherwise. Most of your kind look at me and see a monster in a wedding dress, a weapon they are borrowing rather than a woman they are gaining." "I look at you," Reuben said, and then stopped himself, because the words wanting to come out were more honest than a huntsman guarding a lord's bride-to-be had any right to say. He settled instead for, "I look at you and see somebody who didn't ask for any of this, same as most of the people in this town didn't ask for a siege." Something in her face softened just barely, just for a moment, before the wall came back up. "Careful," she said, echoing Myra's earlier warning without knowing it. "Kindness from a keeper is a dangerous thing, huntsman. It makes a woman forget she is a prisoner." "You're not a prisoner," Reuben said. "Not while I'm the one holding the key." She laughed then, a short, surprised bark of sound, rough and real, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her. That may be the first honest thing anyone in this stone pile has said to me since I crossed your gate. It would not be the last, though neither of them knew it yet, standing in that narrow tower room with the cookfires of a horde burning low in the valley below, and something else, smaller and warmer, beginning to kindle between them. The market square of Thornwatch Hold had never been generous, even before the siege choked the trade roads and turned every sack of grain into a small fortune. But on the morning Rogash asked to walk among the stalls, Reuben should have known better than to say yes. He walked a half-step behind her, close enough to catch a shoulder or a flung stone, and for the first stretch of the square it seemed his caution was wasted. People simply stared, wide-eyed, whispering behind their hands, children yanked back by nervous mothers. Rogash walked through it with her chin high, the fur mantle thrown back to bare the copper bands on her arms, refusing to shrink from a single gaze. Then a woman at the bread stall spat. It caught Rogash across the cheek, and for one white-hot instant Reuben saw her hand fly to the hilt at her hip, saw the tendon stand out along her jaw, and understood that if she drew that blade in the middle of the market square, treaty or no treaty, someone in this crowd would be dead within the minute, and the war would come roaring back through the gates before nightfall. He got between her and the bread seller before the thought finished forming. "That's enough," he said, sharp enough to crack across the square, and he turned to the woman at the stall, whose face had gone pale with the sudden reality of what she'd done. "She is a guest of this town under Lord Alaric's own protection. You just spat on the only thing keeping your children fed through winter. Touch her again and you'll answer to the Lord's justice, not mine." The bread seller shrank back. The crowd murmured uncertain, and somewhere a stone struck the cobbles near Rogash's boot, thrown from deeper in the press of bodies, and Reuben turned fast enough to see a young man barely more than a boy already reaching for a second. "Don't," Reuben said, and something in his voice, flat and final, made the boy's hand freeze halfway to the ground. He turned back to Rogash. Spittle still marked her cheek, and her hand had not yet left the hilt of her blade, and her eyes, when they met his, were bright with a fury that had nowhere safe to go. "I could end them," she said low, "only for him. All of them before your guards drew a single blade." "You could," Reuben agreed. "And then Gurak's horde would burn this square to ash by morning, and every person watching us right now would be dead, and you'd have died with them, because Alaric's men would cut you down before you cleared the gate. Is that what you want?" She said nothing, but her hand slowly loosened on the hilt. Reuben reached into his coat, unhurried, and drew out a plain linen kerchief, offering it to her without ceremony. "Wipe your face," he said, gently now. "Don't give them the satisfaction of watching you carry their ugliness on your skin a moment longer than you have to." Rogash looked at the offered cloth, then at him, something raw and unguarded flickering across her face before the mask of pride slid back into place. She took it, wiped her cheek with quick, hard strokes, and thrust it back into his hand rather than keep it. "They fear me," she said quietly as they walked on, the crowd parting now in wary, watchful silence rather than open hostility. "Good. Let them fear me. It is safer than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" "That they see me," Rogash said, "and decide I am not worth fearing at all. That is when they will truly hurt me, Reuben Hudson. Not with stones, with indifference." She glanced sideways at him. "You are the only one in this whole rotten town who has looked at me and seen neither a monster to fear nor a nothing to ignore." "Maybe I'm just paying closer attention than most," Reuben said. "Maybe," Rogash allowed, and for the rest of the walk back through the square, she did not draw her blade again, though her hand brushed his once, briefly, at the elbow, as if to steady herself against something she did not yet have a name for. The days folded one into another, marked by the same rhythm-dawn patrol along the wall to check the siege lines hadn't shifted, meals shared in her tower chamber because eating in the hall invited too many stares, and always, underneath the routine, a current building between them that neither dared name. It was during a lesson with the bow, out in the narrow yard behind the North Tower where Reuben trained his hounds when the town still had hounds to spare, that the current finally cracked its banks. "You hold it wrong," Rogash said, coming up behind him as he knocked an arrow, her voice a low rumble near his ear. "No wonder your aim wavers." "My aim doesn't waver," Reuben said, releasing the shaft, watching it bury itself a hand's width from the center of the straw target. "That's a fine shot by any measure." "Fine," she agreed, "for a man shooting rabbits. Not fine for a man who might one day need to put an arrow through an eye slit at 40 paces while something twice his size is trying to remove his head." She stepped closer than strictly necessary, and reached around him to adjust his grip on the bow, her fingers rough and warm over his knuckles, her body a wall of heat at his back. "Like this. Let the string find the corner of your mouth, not your chin. Breathe out as you loose, not before." Reuben's pulse hammered loud enough he was half certain she could hear it. "You've done a fair bit of teaching." "I have done a fair bit of killing," Rogash said, "which requires better instincts than teaching does. But yes, I trained the young ones in my father's camp before." She stopped. He turned his head just enough to catch her profile and found her jaw tight, her eyes fixed on some middle distance that had nothing to do with the target. "Before what?" "Before it does not matter," she said, too quickly stepping back, and the loss of her warmth at his back felt like a door closing. "Loose another, properly this time." He loosed another arrow. It struck dead center, and he knew without needing to check that it had far more to do with the phantom heat of her hands still lingering on his knuckles than with any correction to his form. That night, unable to sleep, he found her again at the tower window, the same as the first night, but this time she did not wait for him to speak first. "I have a secret, Reuben Hudson," she said, so quietly he almost missed it beneath the wind rattling the shutters. "One that could end this siege in fire rather than peace if it falls into the wrong ears." Reuben went very still. "Then maybe you shouldn't tell me." "I have watched this town for 2 weeks," Rogash said. "I have watched your Captain Boren look at me like I am a disease. I have watched your steward Corwin smile too widely every time the word silver passes his lips. And I have watched you." She turned to face him fully now, and in the lantern light her eyes were wet, though her voice never wavered. "You are the only soul in this keep who has never once looked at me and seen only what I am worth to this treaty." "Rogash, my father is dead," she said, and the words came out of her like something torn loose, raw and bleeding at the edges. "Chief Thrag Gorehorn. Dead these 3 months, murdered in his own tent by his second, Gurak Ironjaw, who now wears my father's banner and leads this horde in his name, telling the clans that Thrag himself demands this marriage as the price of peace." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "It is a lie built on a corpse, Reuben. If the clan elders who come to witness my wedding vows learn their beloved chief has been dead 3 months, and his murderer has been ruling in his shadow, they will tear the horde apart in grief and fury, before they ever think of turning that fury outward at your walls. But if they do not learn it, if Gurak completes this treaty in my father's false name, he will have peace enough to consolidate his rule, and when he is strong enough, he will break this treaty like a dry twig and burn Thornwatch, hold to cinders regardless of any vow I speak." Reuben's mind raced, chasing the shape of it. "So either the truth comes out and the horde tears itself apart from grief right outside our walls, or it stays buried, and Gurak uses the peace to arm himself for a war he starts on his own terms later." "Yes," Rogash said, "and I am the only living witness who knows which grave holds my father's bones, because I am the one who buried him myself in secret, before Gurak's men could burn the body and erase the evidence of murder. Why tell me this? You could carry it silent to your grave and no one the wiser." "Because," Rogash said, and her voice broke on the word, the pride cracking to show something achingly human beneath it, "I am so tired of carrying it alone, and you are the first man who has ever made me feel like I did not have to." Reuben crossed the small space between them without deciding to, until he stood close enough to feel the warmth radiating off her, close enough that she had to tilt her chin up to hold his gaze. "You're not alone," he said. Not anymore. Whatever we do with this, we do it together. I swear it. She searched his face for a long moment, as if looking for the lie she'd learned to expect from every mouth that had ever spoken kindly to her. She did not find one. "Careful, huntsman," she whispered, echoing herself, echoing Myra, echoing every warning that had followed them since the gate. "I think I am beginning to want things I have no right to want." "Funny," Reuben said, his voice rough. "I've been thinking the very same thing for 2 weeks now." Her hand came up, slow, deliberate, and rested against his jaw, her thumb tracing the line of it with a gentleness that seemed almost startling from someone built for war. He turned his face into her palm, and for one suspended heartbeat neither of them breathed. Then she kissed him fierce, sudden, her hand fisting in the front of his shirt to drag him closer, and he met her with equal hunger, 2 weeks of unspoken want finally breaking loose all at once. It was not gentle. It tasted of desperation and relief in equal measure, of two people who had each spent too long guarding something alone finally setting the burden down between them. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Rogash pressed her forehead to his, her fingers still curled in his shirt as if she meant never to let go. "This is a very poor idea," she said unsteadily. "Terrible," Reuben agreed and kissed her again anyway. Word of a bride's secret does not stay buried long in a town starving on rumor as much as it starves on grain, and Reuben should have guessed that a steward who smiled too widely at the word silver would have ears planted where they did not belong. It was Elder Myra who came to him 3 nights later, her old face drawn tight with worry, catching him alone on the tower stair before dawn watch. "Corwin knows," she said without preamble. "Or knows enough. One of the serving girls overheard something through the door of Rogash's chamber 2 nights past, and like a fool she repeated it to her sweetheart, who happens to keep company with the steward's man. Corwin has been buying grain at siege prices and selling it back to this town at triple cost for 6 weeks, Reuben. A lasting peace ends that prophet dead. If he believes the horde will tear itself apart in civil war the moment this secret surfaces, he has every reason to make certain it surfaces at the worst possible moment loud enough to collapse the treaty, but blamed on someone else so his hands stay clean." Reuben's blood ran cold. He'd start the war back up on purpose, for coin. "Men have done worse for less," Myra said grimly. "You need to warn her, and you need to do it now before Corwin decides which knife to use." He found Rogash already awake, pacing her chamber like a caged wolf, and the moment he told her, her face went the color of old ash. "If Corwin exposes this at the wedding in front of the clan elders," she said, "there will be no controlled reveal, no chance to steer their grief toward reason. It will be chaos, blood, and Gurak will use that chaos to seize even tighter control, painting himself as the only strong hand left standing." "Then we get to your father's grave first," Reuben said, "before the wedding. We bring back proof, something undeniable, something that lets the elders see the truth on our terms, in our time, not in the middle of a riot Corwin engineered for profit. The grave is 2 days' ride into the deep wood beyond the siege lines," Rogash said, "past Gurak's own patrols." "Then it's a good thing," Reuben said, checking the edge of his hunting knife, "that I know those woods better than any patrol ever will." They slipped from the postern gate before first light, 2 days later, wrapped in dark cloaks, Reuben leading them through deer paths and streambeds he'd walked 100 times before, invisible seams in the landscape that no orc scout trained to watch the roads would ever think to check. Rogash moved beside him like she'd been born to the deep wood herself, silent, alert, her blade never far from her hand. They found the grave on the second evening, a low cairn of river stones beneath a lightning-scarred oak, exactly where Rogash's memory had carried her. She knelt beside it a long moment, one hand pressed to the cold stones, and Reuben stood back and let her grieve in whatever silence she needed, until at last she reached beneath the topmost stones and drew out a bundle wrapped in oiled leather, her father's signet, a heavy ring of black iron set with a chip of red garnet, unmistakable to any orc who had ever knelt before Chief Gorehorn. "This," she said, closing her fist around it, "is proof no elder can deny. My father would never have parted with this ring while he drew breath. If I bring it before them still on my hand rather than his, they will know. They made camp that night in a shallow cave above a frozen creek, and it was there, with the proof of a murdered chief tucked safe in Rogash's pack, and the whole desperate gamble of the coming days laid bare between them, that the last of their restraint finally gave way. If this goes wrong," Rogash said quietly, watching the small fire Reuben had coaxed to life, "I may not live to see another sunrise after the wedding day." "It's not going to go wrong. You cannot promise that, huntsman." She looked at him across the flames, her eyes gold and fierce, and for the first time since he'd met her, afraid. "I have faced armies without flinching. I have buried my own father with my own hands and told no one. But I find I am afraid of very little compared to how afraid I am of losing whatever this is, before I have even let myself have it." Reuben moved around the fire and drew her into his arms, and she came without resistance, pressing her face into his shoulder, and he held her the way he would hold something rare and precious found unexpectedly deep in the wild, carefully, reverently, aware of exactly how easily it could be lost. "You have me," he said into her hair. "Whatever happens at that wedding, whatever Corwin or Gurak or anyone else tries, you have me, and I am not going anywhere." She lifted her face to his, and this time when they kissed there was no desperation in it, only a slow, deep tenderness, a promise spoken in touch rather than words. When she finally drew him down onto the furs beside the fire, it was with a certainty that had nothing to do with duty or treaty or fear, and everything to do with two people who had found, against every reasonable expectation, exactly where they belonged. The night passed warm despite the winter cold pressing against the cave mouth, wrapped in furs and each other, and if either of them thought of the danger waiting at Thornwatch Hold, they did not speak of it again until dawn forced them back onto the road. They returned to Thornwatch Hold on the fourth night to find the gate torches burning strange and low, and something in the wrongness of that silence made Reuben's hand go to his knife before they'd even crossed the tree line. "Something's happened," he murmured. They slipped in through the postern the same way they'd left, only to find Elder Myra waiting in the shadow of the tower stair, wringing her hands. "Corwin knows you're back," she hissed. "He's told Lord Alaric the Orc bride fled the town to warn her people of some plot, that she means to betray the treaty from within. Alaric's frightened enough to believe it. He's ordered you both arrested the moment you're seen." "That's a lie," Reuben said. "We can prove it's a lie. We have a horn sounded from the wall, sharp and urgent, cutting him off. Then another. Then worse, the deep, rolling drumbeat of the horde's war drums rising from the valley beyond the walls, not the idle drums of a siege camp settling for the night, but the frantic, driving rhythm of an assault." "That's not us being discovered," Rogash said, going still, listening with a warrior's practiced ear. "That's Gurak. He's moving early. Why would he attack now?" "The truce holds until the wedding, because," Rogash said, and her face had gone hard as flint, "Corwin's man was not the only ear at my door. If word reached Gurak's spies that I carry proof of his treachery, he cannot afford to let me live long enough to speak it before the elders. Better to burn this town to the ground tonight, kill me in the chaos, and call it an act of war rather than let the truth ever reach clan ears." Myra's face drained of color. "The walls are undermanned. Half the guard was pulled to watch for your return instead of the siege lines. Reuben, if Gurak throws his full strength at the north gate tonight, she didn't need to finish." Reuben was already moving, Rogash a half step behind him, both of them sprinting for the north gatehouse as the war drums grew louder, and the first flaming arrows arced up out of the darkness beyond the walls. The north gatehouse was chaos by the time they reached it, a handful of guards, no more than a dozen, scrambling to man a chokepoint meant for 50, while beyond the walls the drums rolled on, and the shapes of Gurak's shock troops began pouring out of the tree line in the flickering light of their own torches. "Where's Boren? Where's the rest of the garrison?" Reuben shouted at the nearest guard, a boy barely past his first beard. Half the men are still down at the south wall, sir. Corwin told the captain the attack would come from the river side. He was so certain. Reuben understood then, with a cold, sick clarity, that Corwin had not only spread lies about Rogash to cover his own profiteering, he had misdirected the town's defenses at the exact moment Gurak needed a hole to pour his assault through, whether by cowardice, bribery, or simple catastrophic incompetence. It did not matter which. What mattered was that the North Gatehouse, the only chokepoint between 6,000 orc warriors and a town of women and children, was held by 12 frightened guards, 1 huntsman and 1 orc bride. The entire assault existed to kill. "Bar the inner gate," Reuben ordered, already hauling the great oak crossbeam toward its brackets. "Rogash, with me on the wall. We hold the murder holes as long as we can, buy the rest of the garrison time to reach us." 12 men and 2 of us against Gurak's shock troops, Rogash said, already stringing her own recurved bow, taken from a rack of siege stores. Against odds like that, huntsman, most would call it a death sentence. "Most," Reuben said, knocking an arrow of his own, "haven't seen what the 2 of us can do together." The first wave hit the gate like a hammer blow, orc warriors swinging a makeshift ram against the iron-bound oak, while others threw grapples up toward the wall top, and Reuben and Rogash fought side by side in the narrow confines of the gatehouse parapet, as if they had trained together for years, rather than weeks him picking off climbers before they cleared the wall, her cutting down anyone who made it over with brutal, efficient strikes of her curved blade. Both of them shouting warnings to the other over the roar of the assault, moving in a rhythm that felt less like desperate improvisation and more like a dance they'd always known. A grapple hook caught the stone beside Reuben's head, and before the attached rope could go taut, he felt Rogash's hand fist in the back of his jerkin, hauling him bodily aside as an orc warrior vaulted the wall where he'd stood a heartbeat before. She put her blade through the man's throat before his boots even found purchase on the stone. "You'd have lost your head," she snarled, shoving him back into position. "Oh, you won," Reuben gasped, already loosing another arrow. The gate held through the first wave, and the second, but by the third the great ram had cracked the crossbeam, and Reuben could hear it groaning under the strain, and he knew with the flat certainty of a man who had spent his life reading danger in the deep wood that the gate would not survive a 4th strike. 2 of the 12 guards were already down, 1 dead, 1 dragged back bleeding by his fellows, and the rest were gray-faced with exhaustion and terror. "Reuben," Rogash's voice, sharp, urgent, cutting through the din. "If that gate falls, this town has no second line. You need to fall back, get the townsfolk moving toward the keep. Not without you. I am not asking you to leave me. I am asking you to trust me." She caught his face in both bloodied hands, forcing his eyes to hers amid the chaos raining down around them. "I know this horde's tactics better than any soul on this wall. Give me the oil stores, give me 30 seconds, and I will buy us the time to fall back in order rather than rout in panic." There was no time to argue, and every instinct honed by 20 years in the wild told him her instinct was the one to trust. Do it. What followed would be spoken of in Thornwatch Hold for years afterward, in taverns and market stalls, always with the same disbelieving shake of the head. How the orc bride, bought with furs and silver to end a war, had stood alone atop the burning gatehouse and turned the tide of an assault that should have swallowed the town whole. Rogash hauled a barrel of lamp oil to the parapet edge, and, timing it with a killer's precision, heaved it down onto the packed mass of warriors struggling to swing the ram forward for its final strike. Reuben, understanding her intent in an instant, put a fire arrow into the spreading slick before it could soak away, and the night exploded into a wall of orange flame that sent Gurak's front rank screaming backward in chaotic retreat, the ram abandoned, burning, useless. But it bought only moments, not victory. Behind the flames, more warriors surged forward, seeking a way around the fire, and a second grapple team found purchase on the wall's eastern face, out of sight of the remaining guards. Reuben saw them first 6 warriors already scaling the stone, moments from breaching the parapet from an unguarded angle that would let them take the gatehouse from behind while everyone's attention stayed fixed on the burning ram. There was no time to shout a warning that would reach anyone but Rogash. "Behind us! East wall!" He bellowed, already sprinting the length of the parapet, and Rogash was a half-step behind him, both of them converging on the unguarded stretch of wall just as the first climber cleared the top. What came next was less a battle than a blur. Reuben's knife opening a throat, Rogash's blade taking a warrior's arm at the shoulder, both of them fighting back to back in a space barely wide enough for the two of them. 6 against 2. No guards close enough to help, only the two of them standing between the breach and the sleeping town beyond. A blade caught Reuben's shoulder, shallow but bleeding freely, and he staggered. And for one terrible instant, an orc warrior's axe rose over him with nothing between the blade and his skull. Rogash's roar tore through the night as she threw herself bodily into the warrior's path, catching the axe stroke on her own blade with a force that drove her back a full step, sparks screaming off crossed steel, and then she was inside his guard, driving her knife up under his ribs with both hands, and the man folded and fell, and she rounded on the last of the climbers with blood-slicked hands and eyes gone wild with fury, and finished them before Reuben had even regained his footing. When it was done, when the last body had toppled from the wall and the burning ram below had guttered into embers, and Gurak's remaining forces had pulled back into the darkness to regroup rather than press an assault that had cost them so dearly for so little ground, Reuben found himself sitting hard against the parapet stone, breathing like he'd run 20 miles, Rogash sinking down beside him with equal exhaustion, both of them bloodied, both of them alive. "You threw yourself in front of an axe for me," he said, when he could finally speak. "You would have died," Rogash said simply, as if it were the only possible explanation required. "I have buried one person I loved this year already, Reuben Hudson. I refuse to bury a second." The word loved hung between them in the smoke-thick air, unplanned, unretractable, and neither of them moved to take it back. "I love you too," Reuben said, hoarse, certain of it in a way he had never been certain of anything in his careful, solitary life. "Have done for longer than I've had sense enough to admit." She kissed him then, tasting of blood and smoke and something fiercely, achingly tender, and around them the town began to stir awake to the news that the North Gate had held, that an orc woman and a huntsman had stood against a horde and won, and that whatever this treaty had been bought to prevent, it had very nearly cost them everything in a single burning night. Dawn found Thornwatch Hold shaken but standing, the North Gate scorched and battered but not breached, and Lord Alaric white-faced and horrified as the full shape of Corwin's treachery came clear the misdirected garrison, the false accusations against Rogash, the profiteering that had left the town's defenses gutted at the exact moment they were needed most. Guards dragged the steward from his chambers before the sun had fully cleared the hills, his protests of innocence drowned out by a dozen witnesses among the garrison who had heard him insist, with strange and specific confidence, that the attack would surely come from the river side. "He'll answer for this," Alaric said grimly, watching Corwin hauled away in chains. "But that answer's only half of what nearly destroyed us last night. Rogash Gorehorn, I am told you carry proof that changes everything about why we're at war at all." Word had already spread, as word does, faster than any decree of the ring recovered from a hidden grave, of a murdered chief and a usurping second, of the truth that could unmake or remake the entire siege depending on how it was delivered. The clan elders, summoned under truce banner for what should have been a simple wedding, would arrive within 3 days, and now that arrival carried the weight of an entirely different reckoning. "I will speak the truth before them," Rogash told Alaric plainly, standing in the hall with her father's ring on a cord around her neck, Reuben at her shoulder where he had not left her side since the gate. "Not to shatter the horde in grief-driven chaos, as Gurak feared, but on my own terms, in my own words, with the ring as undeniable proof, so the elders may choose a rightful path forward rather than be swept into blind fury. And the marriage? Alaric asked, though something in his voice already anticipated the answer. The treaty was built on that union, Rogash. Furs and silver already paid, vows expected before the elders 3 days hence. Rogash's hand found Reuben's, and she did not let go. The treaty, she said, was built on a lie from the start, your steward's greed on one side, a murderer's deception on the other. I will not build my life atop that same rot, my lord, whatever silver changed hands to purchase the attempt. Let the elders come. Let the truth be spoken, and let whatever peace follows be built on something real, rather than on a bride bought like livestock to paper over other men's crimes. Alaric had the grace, at least, to look ashamed. Then Thornwatch Hold owes you a debt it can never fully repay, Lady Gorehorn. Last night, you saved this town with a blade in your hand when my own defenses failed you. I would be a poor lord, indeed, to demand a wedding vow at the end of it, as though nothing had changed. The 3 days that followed passed in a strange, suspended calm, the siege lines quiet, both sides waiting for the elders' arrival, and Reuben spent them at Rogash's side in the open now, without pretense of duty or secrecy, walking the market square where the same townsfolk who had once spat now watched with a very different kind of silence, not fear exactly, but something closer to awe, and in more than one case, something closer to gratitude. The clan elders arrived on the morning of the 4th day, a solemn procession of gray-bearded orcs in ceremonial furs, riding beneath a truce banner into the open ground between the town walls and the siege lines, where a wide clearing had been prepared for the parley-churned earth trampled flat by weeks of siege, ringed now by watching townsfolk on the wall above and warriors of the horde along the tree line below, both sides drawn by the promise of a reckoning neither fully understood yet. Gurrak Ironjaw stood at the head of his own honor guard, resplendent in the black banner and wolf-pelt mantle that had once belonged to Chief Thrag Gorehorn, and when Rogash strode out into the clearing to meet the elders, Reuben at her side, his eyes went first to the cord around her neck, and Reuben watched the exact moment recognition, and dawning terror crossed the warlord's broad face. Rogash Gorehorn, said the eldest of the visiting elders, a bent, white-haired orc named Vaka who leaned heavily on a carved staff, you were summoned to speak your marriage vows before us today. Instead, you stand here with blood on your leathers and something clenched in your fist. Speak plainly, daughter of Thrag. We have not crossed half a kingdom under truce banner for silence. Rogash lifted the ring from around her neck, holding it high enough for every elder, every warrior, every watching townsperson to see the unmistakable chip of red garnet catching the morning light. My father is dead, she said, her voice ringing clear across the churned earth, carrying to every corner of the clearing. Murdered 3 months past in his own tent by the man who has led you here under his banner ever since. Her arms swung, slow and deliberate, to point directly at Gurrak. Gurrak Ironjaw killed Chief Thrag Gorehorn with his own hands, and has ruled this horde in a dead man's name, so that none among you would question the order to besiege this town, to arrange this false marriage, to pour out your strength and your sons' lives for a peace he never intended to honor. Chaos did not erupt, not immediately. Instead, a terrible, weighted silence fell over the clearing, every elder's eyes swinging toward Gurrak, whose face had gone the color of ash beneath his green hide. Lies, Gurrak snarled, but his hand had already dropped toward his axe, and that alone told every elder present more than any words could. The huntsman's whore speaks lies to save her own. I buried him myself, Rogash cut across him, unmoved by the insult, her voice never wavering. Beneath the lightning oak past the eastern ridge, 3 days' hard ride from here, where his second thought no one would think to look. I can lead any of you to that grave this very hour. Dig there, and you will find your true chief's bones, and the wound in his ribs that no siege blade made. Elder Vaka's ancient eyes had not left Gurrak's face throughout, and now the old orc staff came up, leveled at the warlord like an accusation made solid. "Thrag Gorehorn was my chief before your father's father drew breath, Gurak Ironjaw. I marched beside him 30 years. Tell me now, before this parley and these witnesses, that his daughter lies, and look me in the eye while you say it." Gurak's gaze flicked once, desperately, toward his own honor guard, seeking support that did not come, for even his own warriors had gone still, uncertain, watching the ring catch the light, watching the terrible calm certainty on Rogash's face, watching a lie 30 years in the building begin to crack under the weight of a single truth spoken plainly. "I did what was necessary," Gurak said at last, and the admission, half snarled, half defiant, fell across the clearing like a thunderclap. "Thrag had grown weak, cautious, unwilling to press our advantage against these soft-walled towns while our people starved in the high passes. I did what a true leader must." He did not finish. Elder Vaka's staff cracked across the ground, and 4 of the eldest warriors present, men who had served Thrag Gorehorn since before Gurak was old enough to hold an axe, moved as one, weapons rising, not toward Rogash, not toward the town, but toward the warlord who had murdered their chief and worn his name like a stolen cloak for 3 long months. What followed was brief and brutal, and entirely among the orcs themselves, Gurak's own honor guard, faced with the naked truth of their leader's crime spoken openly before the horde's most respected elders, chose in the space of a few heartbeats not to die defending a murderer. Gurak was seized, disarmed, and dragged before Vaka in chains before the sun had climbed another hand's width in the sky, and the war drums that had driven a desperate assault against Thornwatch, Hold's north gate only days before, fell silent, this time for good. "Siege ends today," Vaka declared, once the clearing had settled, once Gurak had been led away under guard to face whatever justice the clan reserved for chief killers. Not through a bride bought to purchase peace with furs and silver, but through truth spoken plainly by a daughter brave enough to bury her father's memory in honesty rather than let it rot beneath a usurper's lie. The old elder's gaze found Rogash, softening with something that might have been pride. "Thrag would have been fiercely proud of you, child. As I am on his behalf." Rogash's composure, held so steady through the accusation and its violent aftermath, finally cracked, and Reuben watched her blink hard against sudden tears as decades of duty and secrecy and grief finally found somewhere safe to land. Lord Alaric, watching from the wall above with the rest of the town, called down across the clearing before the moment could fully close. "Then the marriage, Lady Gorehorn, the terms of the treaty surely with the true peace secured, we might still—" He did not get to finish the thought. Rogash turned from the elders to face the wall, to face the watching town, to face Alaric himself standing pale and hopeful above the gate, and Reuben saw something settle in her, some final decision reached and held without a single flicker of doubt. "Bring the chests," she called up to him, her voice carrying easily across the clearing to every straining ear along the wall. "The furs, the silver, every piece of it paid to purchase me as though I were a prize mare rather than a woman with a name and a will of her own." Confused servants hauled the great chests from the keep stores, dragging them out through the gate and down into the clearing at Rogash's direction. The very furs that had thudded into the frozen mud on the day of her arrival, the very silver bars that had bought, or so everyone believed, a peace built on lies. Every eye in the clearing, orc and human alike, watched as Rogash strode to the open chests, hauled the topmost bundle of furs free with both powerful arms, and in front of the assembled elders, the watching horde, and every soul crowded along Thornwatch Hold's battlements, flung them back through the open gate to land in a heap at Lord Alaric's feet. "I return your price," she declared, loud enough that no one, not the elders, not the horde, not the townsfolk pressed against the palisade, could mistake her meaning. "Every fur, every bar of silver, back to the man who thought a woman's hand could be purchased like grain at market. I was never yours to buy, my lord, and I will not be bought twice." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alaric stood frozen at the gate, staring down at the pile of furs at his boots, at the chests of silver being hauled back through behind them, utterly speechless. Rogash turned from him, from the chests, from the whole weight of furs and silver that had once defined her worth in the eyes of two warring peoples, and crossed the churned earth of the clearing to where Reuben stood, waiting, heart hammering, hardly daring to believe what he was witnessing. "I kept nothing of what they paid for me," she said, close enough now that only he could hear it clearly, though every watching eye could see the two of them standing close, could see her hand rise to rest against his chest, over the steady thunder of his heart. "Furs, silver, a lord's false promise of peace. I want none of it. There is only one thing in this entire wretched bargain I intend to keep, Reuben Hudson, and he is standing right in front of me." Rogash, his voice cracked on her name. "I choose you," she said, simple and absolute, loud enough now that the clearing itself seemed to hold its breath around them. Not because any treaty demanded it, not because any chest of silver bought it. "I choose you because you stood between me and a mob when you owed me nothing, because you trusted me with a secret that could have gotten you killed for knowing it, because you fought beside me on a burning wall when any sane man would have run, and because, for the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw a woman worth choosing rather than a weapon worth wielding." Her hand curled into the front of his shirt, echoing that first desperate kiss in the tower, though there was nothing desperate in her now only certainty. "Marry me, Reuben Hudson, not for treaties, not for silver. Because I love you, and I refuse to spend one more day pretending otherwise in front of elders or lords or anyone else who thinks they have a say in who I choose to keep." The clearing erupted, not into violence this time, but into a strange, disbelieving murmur that swelled toward something almost like celebration. Townsfolk and orc warriors alike watching an orc bride refuse a lord's fortune to claim a huntsman instead. And somewhere in the crowd Reuben heard, unmistakably, Elder Myra's cracked old laugh ringing out with delight. "I love you," Reuben said, and it came out rough, thick with an emotion he'd spent a lifetime keeping carefully banked, unused to being wanted this fiercely, this completely by anyone. "I've never in my life had anyone choose me first, Rogash, not like this, not with the whole world watching." "Then get used to it," she said, half laughing, half crying, "because I intend to keep choosing you every single day for the rest of my life, whether the world is watching or not." He kissed her then, in the middle of the churned clearing, with the truce banners snapping overhead, and the elders looking on with quiet approval, and the townsfolk of Thornwatch Hold cheering from the wall above. And it tasted like nothing had ever tasted before, like freedom, like relief, like a future neither of them had dared imagine 3 short weeks earlier. Elder Vaca's staff struck the ground once, drawing the clearing's attention back to him, his ancient face creased with something that might almost have been amusement. "It seems," the old orc said dryly, "that the daughter of Rogash Gorehorn intends to seal this peace not with a treaty bride, but with a marriage of her own choosing. I find, strangely, that I approve. A peace bought with lies and silver was never going to hold. A peace witnessed by truth, and by love freely given rather than purchased, might yet." He looked to Lord Alaric, still standing dumbstruck at the gate amid his returned furs. "The siege lifts today regardless, my lord. The horde withdraws under new leadership, and I will personally see that no warband troubles this town again while I draw breath. That much, at least, we owe the woman who chose honesty over comfort, whatever choice she makes for her own heart afterward." Alaric, to his credit, found his voice at last, and it came out humbled rather than resentful. "Then Thornwatch Hold thanks you, Lady Gorehorn, for a peace far more honest than the one I tried to purchase. Whatever silver was spent, I consider it well lost if this is the true cost of ending a war." That evening, as the horde began the long, orderly process of breaking camp beyond the walls, not in retreat, but in the unhurried withdrawal of a people finally free of a usurper's war, Reuben found Rogash alone atop the north gatehouse, the same scorched parapet where they had fought back to back only days before, now quiet beneath a sky full of hard winter stars. "You could have anything now," he said, coming to stand beside her at the wall. Vaka all but named you kin to the true line of chiefs tonight. You could return to your people with honor, claim a place among the clan elders, want for nothing. I could, Rogash agreed, turning to face him, the fur mantle stirring in the cold night wind. Or I could ride into the deep wood with a huntsman who answers to no lord and owns little more than a good bow and a steady hand, and want for nothing anyway, because I would have everything that actually matters. She reached for his hand, lacing her rough fingers through his. I did not survive a murdered father and a false war and a burning gate to spend my freedom sitting in another hall being told who I must be for someone else's benefit, Reuben. I want the wild. I want the open road. I want you without a treaty or a title standing between us. The Lord's woods have been my whole life, Reuben admitted. Never had a reason to want more than what I could see from a deer path and a campfire. Didn't think I ever would. And now. Now, he said, drawing her close, I think I'd follow you into any wood in this world and call it the finest home I've ever had. They left Thornwatch Hold 3 days later, once the last of the horde's withdrawal was confirmed, and the town's gates stood open to trade roads for the first time in 2 months, riding out not through the grand gate where furs and silver had once been paid for a bride, but through the same quiet postern they'd once slipped through in secret, this time in the full light of a cold, clear morning, with no need for shadows or silence. Elder Myra saw them off at the edge of the trees, pressing a small bundle of dried herbs and bandages into Rogash's hands with fierce, motherly insistence. For the road, she said gruffly, blinking suspiciously bright eyes. And don't you dare go getting yourself killed out there, girl. Not after everything it took to keep you both breathing this long. I intend to live a very long time, old mother, Rogash said, surprising them both by pulling the elder into a brief, careful embrace. Long enough to visit and remind you that you were right about the huntsman all along. Lord Alaric, for his part, offered no grand farewell, only a solemn nod from the wall and a single chest, much smaller than the ones returned in the clearing, containing not silver but seed grain and traveling supplies. An apology offered the only way a chastened lord knew how. Rogash accepted it without pride or resentment, understanding it for what it was. Not a price for anything, but a gift freely given between two people beginning, finally, on equal ground. They rode out into the deep wood side by side, the walls of Thornwatch Hold falling away behind them, the siege lines long since trampled back into ordinary meadow grass, the war drums silent, the future entirely, wonderfully unwritten. Where to, huntsman? Rogash asked, as the trees closed soft and green around them, the first true quiet either of them had known in weeks. Wherever you want, Reuben said. I know every deer path and hidden stream between here and the mountains, but I've never once had a reason to care where any of them actually led. Guess that's changed. Then let us find out together, Rogash said, urging her horse forward alongside his, where they lead now. And they rode on, into the rugged, waiting wild, two people who had been bought and sold and lied about and nearly killed by other people's wars, choosing at last, freely and fiercely, only each other, no furs, no silver, no treaty standing between them anymore, only an open road, a shared future, and a love that had survived fire and lies and impossible odds to become the one true thing either of them had ever needed to keep.